is a new project. This is actually my first project that I'm working on. And the first thing that I've actually found interesting, like in my entire whole career, which is my career, like is so new. But anyways, I started working on it nearly a year ago, and it changed a lot, especially in the last 2 months. So it's a work in progress. I may have some, issues. I know my limitations because it's still new, and I still have lots of things to do, and I'm still learning throughout this process. So I apologize in advance, and I hope that you'll fix my mistakes if you can't find them. And I look forward to your feedback. So, I first want to start by saying that this I actually started to where this research comes from. It actually comes from my own experiences. I mean, when I first started to work on feminist philosophy, I was obsessed with Cape, but there was something that I couldn't pinpoint at that point, um, that something wasn't making sense. I thought it was me not understanding anything, but after a while, I realized that it's not, me being dumb or anything, but actually there are limitations to our framework. And I actually realized that because, I'm a non-binary pansexual and a non-white person, even though I look like white. I'm from Turkey, which is a Middle Eastern country. Thanks to our government, they turned us into a Middle Eastern country, but anyways, things happen, it just so yeah. So I'll first start by telling what I'm going to do in this presentation. I'll first introduce you more deeply to my research. Then I'm going to start talking about Kingman's account of misogyny. I'll give you a brief overview, just in case that you're not familiar with it. It's not going to be very comprehensive since I don't have a lot of time, and I'm a serious theater, so if I try not to give a basic overview, I'll probably talk about up to 3 hours just, trying to explain her account. And then I'll explain her limitations. I won't be adding my own ideas to it because when I was working on it, I actually realized that Nora Berenstain, Laurie Watson, and Jen Engelhardt realized them before me and actually wrote amazing papers on them. So I'll use their cases as limitations. And then I'll come to misogyny. You may think, what's that if you haven't read Laurie Watson or Engelhardt, but Watson, in her commentary on Down Girl, proposes misogyny to account for the experiences of non-binary folk, as they call. I'll explain it briefly, then I'll say why it is still not sufficient. Then I'll briefly explain what I think queer media is, how I'm aiming for it to be, etc. And then I'll, conclude everything and it'll be over. Sorry, as I said, I yap a lot. Just, sorry. So, uh, let me introduce you to the research. So, I critically analyze Capeman's framework for misogyny from an intersectional lens, but not the, a Western European or Western centric, Eurocentric kind of intersectional lens. And I focused on whether it can account for queer experiences. Well, I claim no, it can't. And instead, I propose a framework which I aim it to be a structural parallel of men's framework for misogyny, which I will call queer media. So I aim to repurpose the term as a powerful theoretical tool. It's a term that currently used. There are some, papers written on about it, etc. Not like, as far as I realize, not from the, gender studies perspective or anything, but this term is used not very much. So I believe that since it's not like commonly used and acknowledged, it's wise to repurpose it, as soon as we can, so we can use it for, something more important, if that makes sense. And I believe it will enable us to account for the phenomenon that many, if not all, perceived or actual queer individuals face on a daily basis. I will explain if we won't forget why perceived or I say perceived or actual. I make a distinction about it. I'll say more about it, but it's basically, what matters if you're a queer or a perceived queer or a perceived individual is how people perceive you, how you look to them. For instance, I look like a hetero woman while I'm like, none of them actually. Or there are some hetero, for instance, men, which happens a lot in Turkey. They act a little feminine, or they have a high pitched sound, and they are treated like they are gay, which is not a nice thing to be treated as if you're in Turkey or Middle Eastern countries or third world countries, and even the Western countries right now currently. I believe that sorry, just but though I believe that this framework is important to take a step towards fixing the limitations that Capeman's framework has, which is a great framework, but it comes with its limitations, and it's important to make a more inclusive and accurate understanding of career experiences, especially in these era of reactionary politics and everything. So, why my project is important, why this framework is important? Well, in the current political environment where reactionary politics, fascism, and right wing ideas are on the rise, the need for a new framework which can address the limitations of man's framework is like urgent, because critics individuals are not having enough hermeneutical tools to make sense of their experiences, or find ways to resist the things that the hostilities, the marginalization, and everything that they're facing right now. And for this framework, I propose Greenmedia, which is, as I said, structured parallel to misogyny, and names and tracks systemic hostility toward actual or perceived queer individuals. So, finally, I can start talking about men. So, who is misogyny for? Sorry. Now I'll, as I said, give a basic overview of her framework. She talks about, she identifies naive understanding of misogyny, which is this dictionary definition style understanding. And it defines misogyny as a property of individual agents, and typically men. And it bases the hatred to person's individual psychology. And this naive understanding takes misogyny to be, sorry, uh, they understand it to be a hatred of woman to a woman. It is believed that these individuals who we call misogynists hate every and all women that they meet, they see, etc. But Hitman says that this understanding, this naive definition is too narrow, because it focuses on the universal hatred and makes misogyny seem like a rare phenomenon, where it actually is everywhere at every corner in our lives, and or all around the world. And it creates epistemological inaccessibility to its victims, because when it's puts psychology on its basis, on its core, it would seem like you can't see if someone's misogynist, if it's psychological, unless you're their therapist. So it also silences its victims, because they wouldn't be able to, identify and fight against these misogynists, these misogynistic experiences. Also, it depoliticizes misogyny, because it puts misogyny as a psychological illness, a pathological something, irrationality and phobia kind of thing. So the systematic aspect of misogyny is just goes away, so the political nature can't be seen at that moment, at that point. Also, she mentions no true Scotsman problem. A true misogynist wouldn't do that. A true misogynist wouldn't do this, etc. So, if you define, if you take the naive understanding as your basis, you would always, come up with a real misogynist, a real, for instance, he can't be a real misogynist because he likes his mother. He has to hate all and every woman. So, you end up with the no true dichotomy problem. So she proposes uh, ameliorative and claiming to be intersectional proposal of misogyny, which she identifies as fundamentally a property of social systems or environments, is the law enforcement branch of patriarchal order. It policies and enforces women's subordination and uphold male dominance, and it enforces patriarchal norms by visiting hostile or adverse social consequences upon women, and they will try to find the bad women to punish them, to put them on sorry put them through a hostile environments and everything, and they don't have to be the bad women. They just it's enough for them to be look like bad women, never represent women and everything. And she makes a perfect distinction between misogyny and sexism, which I like. She defines sexism as the ideological part, but misogyny is like the law enforcement part. And it's me. You're all good. Okay. So, yes. Okay. Okay, it's first gonna be horrible because I keep forgetting what I was going to say and my mind just went, nah, right now. Anyways, uh, well, basically, misogyny is a law enforcement brand, while sexism is the as well, just the category brand of a patriarchal order. They feed into each other and they make the patriarchal order work perfectly, basically. And while the primary function of misogyny is to police and enforce women's subordination and uphold male dominance, sexism tries to rationalize and justify so that you would feel bad or anyone else would feel bad for you if you try to divert it, against the divert from it, etc. And uh sorry, just give me a second. um Sexism also primarily consists of assumptions, beliefs, etc. As the ideological component, and misogyny at that point, since it's trying to um, be the police of the, which we, all know the ACAB, just, we all hate it, and it's all part of the social systems and environments. Sorry, as I said, this part just, it's horrible because I just, okay. So, coming to the limitations. So first, well, there's actually like only one, but there's 1.1 and 1.2. But anyways, uh, the first limitation is the sufficient intersectional analysis, and cis feminist moves to innocence. The moves to innocence thing actually comes from someone's PhD thesis, I believe. But as far as I realize, they stopped doing philosophy. So thanks to Berenstain, that I know about them. Um, Bernstein's main criticism to Maine is to, failure to fully conceive of oppressions besides sexism and misogyny as systemic patterns of social practices, as inherently structural rather than mere collections of individual beliefs and behaviors, which is, in her words. And even though man claims to offer an ameliorative account and an intersectional one, compatible, with the, all the works that's been done in the intersectional area, and acknowledges the problematic history of white feminism. Bernstein observes that the men's claim to be building in space for other theorists to put their insights is not synonymous with thinking structurally about intersecting oppressions, so giving an actual ameliorative and intersectional account of it. And Engelhardt similarly criticizes men for not being fully intersectional. And although he says that they say that although man makes room for insights about intersecting oppressions and includes examples involving women of various backgrounds, which she included in her book Misogyny, which is misogyny against Black women. She does not sufficiently theorize misogyny and other forms of oppression as structurally interdependent. Also, I'm sorry for misgendering. Just we don't have gender pronouns in Turkish, so I just it happens without me realizing. I'm actually sorry about it. I try my best to not to do it, but sometimes I just slip. Again, I'm so sorry. And Men's framework might not deeply analyze how different axes of oppression, such as race, class, ableism, age, sexual orientation, are enmeshed and mutually reinforcing with misogyny rather than simply co-occurring. And I'll now come to the problematic commission of transmisogyny, where Berenstain uses the terms as feminist moves to innocence. I think it was in the preface of it. She literally has regret course where Kate Mann, says that, well, I'm sorry, I'm a white woman, so I can't talk about any of the trans misogynies, so I have to exclude that part. But also I will be talking about misogyny because, I'm doing something intersectional, etc. This is actually, not having the records of authority and lived experience part is exact right from her face, from her regrets, which is actually funny because she says that, then she goes on to talking about misogyny, but she is a white woman. But and if you don't have records of authority and lived experience, like how can you talk about misogyny? It doesn't make sense. Anyways, it's a limitation after all. And Bernstein says that this is a cis feminist move to innocence, specifically a claim of non-experience. They try, and this is feminist moves to innocence, and in the claim of non-experience, do you try to, get rid of the epistemic blame by trying to look like you're doing something noble? That, oh, I don't know anything about it, so I shouldn't be talking about it, so I won't talk about it. So don't hate me and everything. That's what they are doing actually at that point. That's how Bernstein defines that as well. And this is problematic for a few reasons, which is the abdication of responsibility, as I briefly uh no, sorry, explained. Well, epistemic humility is admirable. It just does not justify you abdicating the responsibility to engage with the work that people from those areas, people with these experiences, um, put their time to do all the work and on misogyny. If you just don't care about that, just if you just say, yeah, I'm not responsible about it, and just leave it like that, it's problematic. Like, you know, it it actually makes you what you're doing politically ineffective, if that makes sense. And it's inconsistent as well because, as I said, she says, well, I can't talk about trans misogyny because I'm a white woman, I'm a white woman, but let me talk about, misogyny. That's the inconsistency part. And reinforcement of epistemic burdens is actually, I forgot the term for it, but, and the philosopher as well right now, but sorry, I'm just really nervous at the moment. Um, you know, the when you put the epistemic burden of talking about those things, m- teaching those things to the people with no experience, to the person who are experiencing all the, hostility and all the problems and everything. So you reinforce the epistemic burden that those marginalized groups are already facing. There was a word and there was a no, no, it's not coming to me right now. Sorry, I just tried this. Anyways, and which causes a limited applicability of men's framework because if you just ignore trans misogyny, if you just, get rid of the responsibility of talking about it and also ignore the work that has been done on that area, just so I'll leave other people to talk about it, so I wouldn't have to, etc. Makes your framework, which you claim to be ameliorative and intersectional, and she actually at one point claims that it is a full account um of misogyny. So you just, well, it's not basically. You can't keep claiming that your account is a full account, but no, it's not. Uh, Anyways, and for closure, critical analysis is that, Bernstein asserts that one cannot a priori decide that investigating transmisogyny will not impact a unified account of misogyny without actually undertaking that investigation. So, she says that couching this selective omission in concern and regret is a cis feminist move to innocence. Sorry, I'll just bother for a second. And the second one that I want to talk about is the limited scope regarding gender non-conforming persons, which I'll be talking about Wasson Engelhardt again, to pave the way for me to talk about androgyny. So Watson similarly, mentions that man explicitly acknowledges a limitation in its scope with a, lack of development of an account of how patriarchy and so misogyny function together in the context of gender binarism and heteronormativity that serve to oppress, exclude, marginalize, and subordinate those who occupy a space or identities outside these structures, including trans women, gender nonconforming persons, and gays and lesbians. And she proposes misandrogyny as a response aiming to fix this limitation. So, what is misandrogyny? It is a system of mechanisms that policies and enforces um, gender binary of patriarchal order, primarily targeting the gender non-conforming persons. It claims to be intersectional, but again, I have my worries about it because, okay, you include gender non-conforming folk, but what about the other, other people in the spectrum which are not gender non-conforming, but also not women? Where do they fall? Um, what framework they should be looking for to make sense of their experience and etc. And misogyny is also a systemic law enforcement branch of patriarchal order rather than merely an individual psychological disposition, which is similar to men's. So misogyny is also, structural parallel, but I will be claiming that it's not, sufficient. Anyways, Engelhardt says that misogyny is not transphobia because transphobia is commonly used and it's taken to mean, refer to psychological biases and negative attitudes towards trans people. And they argue that mechanisms of misogyny overlap with the mechanisms that target trans folk, and vice versa also happens. But they say that keeping the term as it is, since it is commonly used, acknowledged by even the non-philosophers or non-academics, and it gives an account of important things. It's an important hermeneutical tool, so it's best to use misandrogyny instead of try to repurpose transphobia. So I claim that it is not successful because its primary focuses on the gender binary enforcement. It's designed to explain systemic mechanisms that police and enforce the gender binary by pushing gender non-conforming persons. Well, instead of, while in misogyny it's pushing women into the norms of patriarchal order, in misogyny it pushes the gender non-conforming persons to non-existence, which means that its core logic targets who do not fit neatly into patriarchal norms as a man only or a woman only. And it's limited scope for sexual orientation because, okay, let's say gender non-conforming, it's okay. You got the gender part all right, but what about people who are queer on the sexual part, if that makes sense? So I think it's limited at that part to give a proper account of the hostilities and everything that people are facing. Uh, oh, I've been talking so long. Anyways, uh, and the definition of GNC folk, which is gender nonconforming folk, is based on patriarchal perception, uh, which, its definition is that not the ones that are not consistently situated by patriarchal norms as either a man or a woman, uh, and it's not about self-identification. I will be having the same limitation, by the way, because of that I will be differentiating between perceived queer slash cishetero individuals or actual ones. So I think this is also a limitation for me, but I don't know how to fix this. So if you have any idea, I'm open to it. Um, and well, this definition of based on patriarchal perception means that if you identify as a non-binary but you're not perceived as a non-binary by the society, by the normal people, people who conform to patriarchal norms and everything, that you just don't fit into this framework. This framework is not for you because you pass as cishet person. Okay, then you don't have any problem, you can just go on living your life. And its intersectionality is primarily less focused on GNC folk, which comes to the other points as well. What about the people who are on the different parts of the spectrum? So now, for media, before explaining what I understand of it, I'll I'll first tell how it's normally understood. It's a broader term for homophobia that includes the gender identity axis. And since it's not commonly used, I find it useful to repurpose it as a theoretical tool so that we would be able to account for the phenomenon that many, if not all, perceive their actual queer individuals face on a daily basis. Uh, I will be reading a lot on this part because since this is something that I'm working on real, recently, I keep forgetting, to add some important parts. And, I think it's important. And a lot of things changed about this, framework that I have in mind in the past 2 months. So just not to forget anything, I just, wrote down everything. So it is a structural system of coercive enforcements that target individuals perceived as queer through their gender expression, embodiment, etc., regardless of how they self-identify. For instance, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes cis-hetero men who identify as cis-hetero men get mistaken for or perceived as gay men, or sometimes if they have long hair and acting a little feminine, trans persons, which puts them into the perceived queer part because they also face the same hostilities, similar microaggressions or actual violence. That's why I put the importance on the perceived or actual distinction. Um, and while self-identification and perception often align, it operates on the level of equity operates on the level of social legibility, not personal identity. For instance, even though I'm a non-binary pansexual, I wouldn't have the same experiences that you know perceived and actual non-binary pansexuals have, because I'm all the time perceived as cis-hetero woman, which I mean I wish I was, but I will never have the same hostilities that the actual and perceived pansexual non-binary person face. So uh, also, as I said countless of times, it's a structural parallel to misogyny, functioning as an enforcement arm of patriarchy. Instead of patriarchal order, I prefer to put patriarchy here, since cisnormativity and heteronormativity are also important parts of patriarchal order, and I believe that they all work together. I think that without the other part wouldn't work. And Where misogyny disciplines those eligible as women for violating patriarchal norms, pre-media targets anyone who disrupts the normative coherence of binary gender, heterosexuality, and gender moral intelligibility. Um, as as I mentioned, if you're like, even though you're a cishetero individual, if you are perceived as a queer person, especially if I well, from Twitter and Instagram and everything, I see that this is also starting to happen in the European countries as well, that you face hostilities, violence, microaggressions, and everything. So it's, it's about how normatively that, you fit into the heteronormative ideals. And it doesn't, well, as I said before, it doesn't rely on actual queerness. Such individuals can become targets, as I said like countless of times. And I aim queer media to account for the full spectrum of hostility, marginalization, and systemic coercion directed at queer and queer perceived people, which includes with but not limited to homophobia, transphobia, homophobia, moral condemnation, epistemic exclusion, pathologization, and social abandonment. And it is not merely a system of misrecognition, but of refusal of recognition itself, because it forces you to fit into what they perceive you as, if that makes sense. It's not about how you identify, but it's about how others, try to put you or try to exclude you from the categories that the cisgender patriarchy forced them into. So yeah, here are my references, but beforehand I'll like to conclude because I talked a lot and I sometimes play down and everything. I firstly talked about, well, gave a brief overview of Kate Mann's framework. I didn't focus on all the parts. She talks about a lot of things, and I think it's a great book. Everyone, I think, should read, even though all the limitations. So, it's really a great book. And then I mentioned limitations, which was taught by Nora Berenstain, Jeff Engelhardt, sorry, and Laurie Watson. And then I talked about the framework that Laura Watson and Jeff Engelhardt proposed, which is called misogyny, to fix the limitations of Kate Mann's framework. But I also argued that it's insufficient, and instead I propose Premesia, which hopefully will, when it's done, will be able to account for all the hostilities that actual and or perceived, but mainly perceived queer individuals face. So thank you, and sorry for